One of Lovevery's new Tricky Topics books are worth it. In this review, I'm going to walk you guys through how it works because it's different than their typical books, the cost, common complaints, and a mini review of each book. We'll leave chapters in the description box below where you can jump ahead to a specific book review as well as links to shop all of it. And if you guys are new here, my name's Rachel from The Confused Mom. Welcome to my channel. I share baby and toddler product reviews, activities, as well as Montessori at-home tips. And I've reviewed all things Lovevery to date, so definitely be sure to go back and check out literally any review you want, from their book bundles where I do individual read-alongs to their play kits and individual products for sale. I've got it all. First, in case you missed it, Lovevery recently dropped their Tricky Topics book line, and they're specifically designed for parents and children going through a specific situation. They pretty much follow the standard Lovevery book formula of real children, real situations, real problems, using gentle parenting scripts as well as teaching a coping skill. Every one of these books also has a QR code on the back with just something that takes it a step deeper and give you guys links so you can check out those resources even if you don't have the book. Books are currently available on Lovevery for active play kit subscribers via the subscriber shop. But if you are not a subscriber, you will be happy to know these are the first standalone books Lovevery is offering for sale on Amazon. The books currently retail for $15 a piece, which is more expensive than their historical price point of about $9 per book. So it's a pretty significant jump. However, after having Lovevery now for over 5 years, I will say their books are continuous resources we reach for over and over again. And I find that the best written children's books typically cost around $15 anyway. In terms of complaints and criticisms before we jump into the individual reviews, I'll say right off the bat, the name Tricky Topics is a bit of a misnomer in my opinion, and I'll go through those specific examples later. But I would really say that managing your expectations, get tricky out of your head and replace it with transition. I was expecting a little bit more from Lovevery on a couple of these topics. I was hoping they would take it a step further or deeper and truly handle the trickiest part of the topic they were looking to resolve instead of just kind of their standard way of talking about problems that come up with little kids. That said, some of the books hit it out of the park and I was beyond surprised. All right, let's talk individual reviews. First up, we're gonna start with Good by Paci, which is probably the book I was the most disappointed in. Lovevery recommends introducing this book around 2 years old. However, I think a lot of pediatric dentists, oral myofunctional therapists, let's say you really should get rid of Binky by like 1 year old. So I would definitely get this book closer to probably 10 or 11 months personally. This was the book I had the highest of hopes for and it just fell flat. I will put the disclaimer out there. This is a tricky book to write in general, as you want something that's going to prepare the child for the transition without freaking them out. And this book does that with flying colors. There's no doubt about that. However, I was hoping for more on that tricky part of this situation. So backstory. Getting rid of the pacifier was by far the hardest thing I have ever done in my parenting journey. I'm getting teary-eyed even now when I think back of it. If there's a source of childhood trauma that my daughter will end up in therapy for, it is going to be this situation. This book was something that like I really hoped was going to speak to something that I hoped other parents would never have to go through. Okay, so when I got this, I was just filled with so much hope. It comes in this really cute little box because it actually has a little bag for you to collect all the binkies together and follow along in the book. First glance, it was incredibly thoughtful and just really cute. I love that on the first or second page, they actually talk about the reason why we need to get rid of our binky for our teeth health. Pretty much none of the other books I went through ever talked about that. In fact, if you follow me on Instagram, you maybe even saw I actually wrote my own Goodbye Binky book for my daughter specifically because this was so incredibly hard for us. And I will say, like, that quick mention of the teeth, it's so small and so insignificant that if you're reading that to a 2-year-old, the way they present that information is not deep enough or repetitive enough where it's going to land for a 2-year-old. That's just my experience. I could be totally wrong. I hope they do a second version of this book where it's more of a choose your own adventure. And Lovevery, if you're watching this, please pay me for this idea if you do it. But it should be a choose your own adventure book where it is a 2-part book. One, exactly as it's written, where you're reading it with your child and preparing them for saying goodbye to their pacifier. And then a second version within the book, like you flip forward to a specific page, for when your child is having a truly hard time with this transition and they need that extra information and support for navigating it. A lot of kids with a severe binky attachment have a hard time with mouth breathing, and the binky usually is sitting up on that vagus nerve, which is calming their nervous system, which is why if you have children that truly freak out over getting rid of the binky, it can honestly feel like they're having a panic attack without that vagus nerve stimulation. So I think a second version of this story, or a continuation of this story for kids that are having a hard time, it talks more about mouth breathing, it talks more about closing your mouth, it talks more about tongue posture, talks more about other coping skills you can do beyond just rubbing a blanket on your face. I will tell you right now, if I read this with my daughter and she saw that this girl just rubbed a blanket on her face and was fine the next day after one day of trying to get rid of her binky, she would think there was something wrong with her, that she couldn't do that too. I think this book is best for parents who are going to be getting rid of the binky with their child closer to 1 year old. They don't have like a history of failures in their back pocket around this. I don't think the book does a particularly great job around the tricky part of saying goodbye to a binky. It does still do a better job than any book I came across currently on the market, as I do think seeing a real child with real pacifiers is going to connect more than looking at a cartoon doing it, which feels very unrealistic. If you've already tried to get rid of the binky and it's failed, this is not going to be the book for you. Next up is In My Own Bed, and this is another one that fell flat for me. Specifically about the transition from a crib to a standalone bed, which again is why I say this line is a bit of a misnomer, because it's about the transition, not the tricky moment that a lot of us parents face when kids are 2 or 3 years old, where it's very developmentally normal for them to go through night terrors and sleep regressions and end up in our bed, which is what I thought by the name In My Own Bed was going to be talking about, getting the child out of a parent's bed, not going from your own bed, your crib, to another version of your own bed. So I think a more appropriate title for this book would have been My New Bed, My Big Kid Bed. Lovevery suggests introducing this book around 2 years old with a note that some kids are not ready to transition until about 3. And this was another book I was extremely excited about because my son, he still sleeps with us. My daughter was always a fantastic sleeper until we got rid of binky, which led to no sleep, night terrors, basically the works. And my literal perfect sleeper from the time she was 8 weeks old on, all of a sudden was sleeping with us for over a year. It's a pretty basic book about the transition from a crib to your own bed and the expectations around the new responsibility and freedom the child will have. That was never something we really struggled with. The whole idea of stay in your room. If it's dark out, go back to sleep. Don't leave the room until mommy and daddy come. Our kids never had a hard time with that. Instead, when they would wake up in the middle of the night, they would scream bloody murder until they either woke up everybody in the house or we went to them. It led to more problems. So we actually had to teach our kids to come into our beds in order for everyone to get sleep again. I think a lot of families that probably follow Lovevery also use Wake to Rise cloth, even when their kid in a crib, in preparing them for that transition of staying in their room until an adult comes and gets them in the morning. I would have liked to have seen a child who was actually scared when they woke up in the middle of the night versus a child who just woke up in the middle of the night and then remembered what mommy and daddy said about going back to sleep if it was still dark. It just didn't feel tricky enough. It was like they overcorrected from past criticisms I had in that things to avoid when selecting books video I did, when this is actually books that we want the trickiest parts of to help us solve the problem. Overall, I'd say this book is great for hyping toddlers up, really reinforcing with lots of repetition about how to handle this newfound freedom. For that reason, I'd say it's good, but not great, given the name of this series. Next is Emmer's Screentime, which is a short, very realistic look about the transition from ending screen time and getting on with your day, and it is by far my kids' favorite book in this line, probably because it's the situation they deal with the most often on a daily basis, so they really feel seen and validated while reading this story. The actual language and script of what happens in this book is so spot on. The thing that really got my husband was when the screen time goes off, Emmer's body gets heavy and she slides off the couch and onto the floor, which is exactly what my 5-year-old does. And my husband goes, "Is that why you do it? Because your body gets heavy?" Because she'll just like slurp down like a little noodle worm. And we all had just a really good laugh. It's definitely the book that when I have it the pile out, I see my kids flipping through on their own the most often. In terms of whether or not to get or skip this, I think it's a great book for parents specifically who struggle with the transition away from screen time. So while I don't think there's anything particularly remarkable in the book itself to help children, the repetition will certainly train parents in how to talk with and navigate moving their kid along. I personally have never doubted how I've handled screen time. Even if my children have really big emotions around it, I don't really have a problem in holding space for their big emotions with this particular transition. So if you feel confident in that, it's not necessarily going to help you, but your kids will 100% feel validated and seen through this experience. It's definitely a book it doesn't hurt to have. Felix Goes to Preschool. This book is perfectly suited for kids around 3 years old who are heading off to preschool for the first time. And I love this book. I did not think I was going to care much about it because the transition to preschool with my oldest was not an issue. My youngest is ready to go, packs his backpack and his lunchbox and literally begs to go into school with his sister every day. This was never a particularly tricky topic for us. However, this book is so well done that it can easily be applied to any social situation that's new and brings up nerves in the child, making it a book that's going to last well beyond the topic itself. For instance, the day we got this book, earlier that day, my daughter's teacher happens to live on our street and they were having a big party in their garage and driveway. My daughter all of a sudden was like, literally the book hiding behind my leg. I need to get out of here, pouting, feeling just really uncomfortable. And then when we read this book later, I looked at her and I was like, oh my gosh, is this what was happening for you when we were there? Because it was confusing. She had all of her familiar friends with her. It was her teacher, her kids, but all of the sudden it was causing a lot of emotion. I was very confused. So the book actually opened up such a great dialogue and conversation about how when there's a lot of new people, when a situation is different than we're used to, and when we feel unsure of what to do, it can bring up nerves and how to work through that. So I think this is a book that's actually going to be really applicable for a lot of different situations and is a book I think pretty much every family should get. Next is Something's Wrong with George, which is a really sweet book about the loss of a pet. It is recommended for kids ages 4 years old and up. It's a very heavy book written in a very developmentally appropriate way. The language is gonna like cut through to some parents reading it and could trigger the parent more than it triggers the kid. This was actually another book I had zero expectations or hopes for. We actually had literally just gone through this situation like a month prior. We were pet sitting our neighbor's pet who happened to be named Georgie, and the thing died while we were watching it. And so we literally had just gone through this situation with our kids. Really validating for me because I kept telling my daughter, Georgie is dead. It's just very blunt language that may seem a little harsh to some other adults. And my husband's like, you're gonna give her a complex. Like, why are you telling her like this? I'm like, because she thinks the thing is sleeping or hibernating and it's gonna wake up. You gotta make this concrete and based on the facts. So to read the book and see that I was validated in how I was handling this was a really nice thing. But I would say definitely parents read the back of the book, which has some tips and explanation around the words chosen in it before you read the book with your child yourself. You know, 4 to 6 year olds, they ask a million questions and this book really shows that in such a true way. Speaking from experience of what we just went through, that they nailed it. I do think this is a book that's worthwhile. Even if you do not have a pet, have never dealt with death firsthand with your kids, I think it's one of those books that's just good to have on hand in preparing them for the inevitable in life and giving them a framework to make sense of something that they will at some point experience. I'd love to hear in the comments what you guys thought, which of these is a must get for you, which of these fell flat for you, what has been your child's experience with them. Help other families out. Be sure to go ahead and check out my past Lovevery reviews. Be sure to check out that video on things to avoid when selecting books for babies, toddlers, and preschoolers. And a lot of people are here, so I'm gonna end this video. As always, my name's Rachel. Have a good one.